The signature was perfect. That was how I knew it was fake. At 2:13 in the morning, I found $48 million moving through 3 companies that did not truly exist. Every transfer carried Adrian Cross's authorization. Every biometric seal matched. And when I checked the final timestamp, someone sent a message to my private phone. Delete the ledger, Omega, or you will be the next name we erase. Julian Vale had spent 6 years learning that numbers were more honest than people. Numbers could be hidden, divided, renamed, and buried beneath respectable language, but they could not lie without leaving a scar. The scar in Cross Meridian's books was a repeating fraction. 0.0317% removed from thousands of legitimate transactions, collected inside 3 shell companies, then returned as acquisition fees. It was almost invisible. Over 18 months, it became $48 million. Julian copied the audit trail to an encrypted drive and slipped it beneath his watch band. Then he closed the file and looked through the glass wall of the executive floor. Adrian Cross stood alone in his office across the corridor, jacket off, black sleeves rolled to his forearms. The Alpha was still working, unaware that his name sat on every stolen dollar. Or pretending to be unaware. By noon, the company ballroom was full of investors, cameras, and champagne. Adrian had barely begun his annual address when financial crimes officers entered through both doors. The room fell silent. "Adrian Cross," the lead officer said, "you are under investigation for fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction." Adrian did not run. He did not argue. His eyes moved once across the crowd and stopped on Julian. Not angry, not frightened. Warding him, Julian's phone vibrated. "You had your chance." On stage, steel cuffs closed around Adrian's wrists. A photographer's flash filled the ballroom, and in that white instant, Julian saw Marcus Vane, chairman of the finance committee, smiling before he remembered to look shocked. Julian returned to the audit room and checked the signatures again. One authorization had been made at 3:42 p.m. on March 9th. Adrian's calendar placed him on a 12-hour flight over the Atlantic. The aircraft's maintenance log confirmed its satellite system had failed before takeoff. No connection, no live biometric approval. The signature was not Adrian's crime. It was his alibi. At 7 that evening, the lights in the audit room went out. Julian reached for the encrypted drive, but a hand covered his mouth. "If I wanted you silent," Adrian whispered behind him, "you would not have heard me enter." Julian drove his elbow backward anyway. Adrian caught it, released him, and stepped into the emergency light. He had been released pending formal charges. His expensive suit was creased, and a red mark crossed one wrist. 12 hours, Adrian said. "That is how long Marcus needs to call an emergency vote and take the company." "And how long do you need?" "Less if the best forensic accountant in the building stops trying to break my ribs." Julian should have called security. Instead, he showed Adrian the impossible timestamp. They began with the shell companies. Each had a different director, address, and bank, but the acquisition contracts contained the same microscopic spacing error after every semicolon. All 3 had been produced from one template. The template belonged to Marcus Vane's committee. Adrian opened a locked executive archive and found the original acquisition proposals missing. Julian traced their physical checkouts to the basement records room. They took the service elevator down together. "Why trust me?" Julian asked. Adrian watched the descending floor numbers. "Because you looked at the evidence when everyone else looked at the handcuffs." The records room smelled of paper and cold metal. Julian found a half-empty file box on the highest shelf. Inside were 2 authorization pages and the charred edge of a third. The door slammed behind them. The electronic lock flashed red. A moment later, the ventilation stopped. Adrian struck the door with his shoulder. It did not move. Julian followed the wall to the fire panel and found the alarm wires cut cleanly. The room had been converted into a vault, designed to protect documents from oxygen and flame. Once the suppression cycle began, breathable air would disappear. Adrian forced open a maintenance grate near the ceiling. The shaft was narrow, but large enough for one person. "Go," he ordered. "You first." "Julian?" The Alpha command sharpened the air between them, but Julian did not move. "If you use that voice again, I will let the fraud charges have you." For one impossible second, Adrian almost smiled. Then the lights turned amber. Suppression in 60 seconds. Adrian lifted Julian to the grate. Julian crawled into the shaft and looked back. Adrian could have followed immediately. Instead, he returned to the shelf, seized the burned authorization page, and pushed it up to Julian before the room went dark. The shaft opened above the adjoining storage bay. Julian dropped to the floor and turned just as Adrian's grip slipped from the ledge. He caught Adrian's wrist with both hands. "I thought Alphas were supposed to rescue Omegas," Julian gasped. "File a complaint." Together they pulled Adrian through as the suppression system hissed behind them. Outside, Julian studied the burned page beneath his phone light. Heat had erased most of the ink, but one silver strip survived along the margin. A biometric template label. Adrian's signature required his password, retinal confirmation, and a server-stored biometric pattern. A criminal could steal a password. He could forge a retinal session, but only the board secretary could export that final pattern. The secretary was Evelyn Shaw, the woman who had managed Adrian's office for 11 years. They found Evelyn in the underground parking garage, sitting inside her car with the engine off. When Adrian approached, she began to cry. Marcus had threatened her son, a medical resident whose licensing mistake Marcus had secretly purchased. Evelyn had copied Adrian's biometric template, but she had also saved the validation logs because she knew Marcus would eventually dispose of her. "The logs are on the internal witness server," she said. "Marcus moved the emergency vote to 8 this morning. After the vote, he will wipe everything." Julian checked the time. They had 43 minutes. The boardroom was already full when they arrived. Marcus stood at the head of the table, calm and silver-haired, speaking about stability while Adrian's empty chair waited beside him. Security blocked the doors. "Mr. Vale," Marcus said, "you are suspended. The evidence now shows you altered the audit under Adrian's direction." Every face turned toward Julian. Once before, he had exposed a senior partner and watched the industry call him emotional, difficult, and unstable. He had promised himself never to stand alone in a room like this again. Adrian stepped beside him, not in front. "He is not alone," Adrian said. Julian placed the burned authorization page on the table. "Then let the server verify the signatures live. If they are genuine, vote against him. If they are copied, call the police." Marcus's composure cracked. "There is no time for theater." "You created the deadline," Julian said. "You can survive 5 more minutes." Evelyn entered through the side door with 2 investigators. On the boardroom screen, the witness server displayed every disputed authorization. The retinal sessions had been simulated. The biometric patterns had been exported from Evelyn's terminal, and the approval requests had all originated from a private device registered to Marcus. Then Adrian opened the second file, the path of the stolen money from shell acquisitions to a fund controlled by Marcus's family office. No one spoke as the investigators moved toward him. Marcus looked at Julian. "Do you think Cross will protect you when this attention becomes inconvenient?" Julian glanced at Adrian. No, I think he finally understands that I do not need protection from the truth. The handcuffs closed around the correct wrists. 3 weeks later, the charges against Adrian were dismissed. Cross Meridian recovered most of the missing funds and created a compensation pool for employees whose pensions had been exposed by Marcus's scheme. Adrian offered Julian a promotion. Julian refused it. "If I report to you," he said, "everyone will assume my conclusions belong to you." So Adrian created an independent office of corporate integrity, answerable to the full board, and offered Julian its leadership. Julian accepted on one condition: Adrian would never enter his office without knocking. At sunrise on Julian's first day, there was a quiet knock on the glass. Adrian stood outside with 2 cups of coffee. "Is this an official meeting?" Julian asked. "No." "Then why are you here?" Adrian set 1 cup beside him. "Because the case is over. Because you are no longer my employee. And because I have wanted to ask you something since you threatened me in the audit room." Julian looked at the alpha who had returned for evidence when the air was running out, then stood beside him when the whole room turned hostile. "Ask," he said. Adrian's expression softened. "Dinner. No board members, no ledgers, no crimes." Julian took the coffee, letting their fingers touch. "1 ledger," he said. "Someone has to make sure you pay your half." This time, Adrian did smile. Outside the glass, the city brightened. Inside, nothing was hidden anymore.